We do know that 70% of people who have a heart attack will not have a symptom prior to having a heart attack. And we know that more than half of the people, or about half, that have their first heart attack really don't survive.
That's Dr. Bill Kapp, board-certified orthopedic surgeon and the CEO of Fountain Life.
The first step to longevity is, number one, don't die of something stupid, meaning don't die of a disease that you should know about that doesn't prematurely end your life.
I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of CRISP, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. CRISP started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. I sat down with Dr. Kapp to discuss longevity and the future of medicine, how to increase your effectiveness as a leader, both personally and professionally, and how to become the CEO of your own health by utilizing data-driven insights.
We live in the wealthiest country in the world with some of the worst outcomes. So at some point, what are you paying for? And secondly, if you have discretionary dollars and you can afford to go through testing, you should. Because if nothing else, get a baseline so that you can start to change the trajectory of your health.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all of our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Michael.
So very, very excited to speak with you. Very excited to learn more about in the field of just longevity, and especially in terms of what Fountain Life is up to. For those that are listening to the podcast, may not be familiar with Fountain Life, organizations like Fountain Life, how would you describe what you do and how you help?
Yeah, no, great question. And first of all, thank you for having me. I think what is the takeaway really is we are a longevity company. And we were founded over 5.5 years ago, and longevity really wasn't a household word at that point. But the idea behind it was really crafted by 4 individuals: myself, Tony Robbins, Dr. Peter Diamandis, and Dr. Bob Hariri, all of whom are healthcare veterans in terms of either we've had directly been involved in patient care, or we've had indirect business ownings or business endeavors inside the healthcare space. But we all realized about 5 years ago, and maybe a little bit more, that the healthcare system is pretty much fundamentally broken. And part of that is that we need a paradigm shift to move away from symptom-based care, which is what we've pretty much done in our entire history of medicine, to go to asymptomatic detection of disease. And so the reason for this largely has to do with educational institutions, historical developments in healthcare, and also exponential technologies that have happened literally in the last decade. So the goal here was to create a clinic model that ultimately would be able to be expanded, maybe be the new paradigm for the rest of healthcare, where you would use technology to detect disease at its very earliest stages before you ever develop a symptom, and then use the latest therapeutics and gerotherapeutics, which are the things that could extend healthy human lifespan, to get you another 10 to 20 healthy years beyond what may be out there today.
Yeah, and I'd love to be able to dive into a lot what you just described from the standpoint of why is traditional medicine so broken? I mean, most people, that their experience with their doctor is not a great one. And it's usually, a lot of time waiting, and maybe they'll see them once a year, a couple times a year. Much of the discussion is focusing very much on like reactive versus proactive care. Why is it such a mess?
Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons for that, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that medicine as an industry is a very slow-moving industry. So we don't adopt technology very rapidly. But the second thing that's happened, and most people fail to realize it, is literally in the last 150 years, we've doubled life expectancy. And the reason is because we've really eliminated what I call the low-hanging fruit. Now, at the time, it wasn't low-hanging fruit, but today we would look back and say, oh, of course, antibiotics, of course, vaccines, of course, public health measures. But at the time, when there was no germ theory of disease, 100 or more years ago, this concept of everything that we take for granted today wasn't apparent. So what happened was 150 years ago, you might have made age 40. Today, you're going to make age 80, most likely, maybe longer. We believe longer ultimately. But the reason is because a lot of that really low-hanging fruit has been eliminated. Now, in the process of doubling life expectancy, we basically have created a system that, number one, doesn't do a very good job at managing chronic disease. So when we take you from 40 to 80, a lot of chronic diseases that take a very long time to finally develop symptoms, all of a sudden start showing up at age 50, 60, 70, 80. We didn't have those because nobody lived that long, or the vast majority of people didn't live that long. So I think when you look at the picture, it's a combination of, number one, exponential accelerating medical innovations. And I always tell people, the medicine has been really amazing if you think about it on its face, because we've gone from penicillin, which wasn't even widely available till 1945, to gene editing in less than one lifetime. So this is really a remarkable, considering the history of the human race. It's really a remarkable technology. The challenge is that we kept the same diagnostic and treatment algorithms all along, meaning that we still waited for you to develop symptoms. And by waiting for you to develop symptoms with chronic disease, the disease burden gets very high, and then when it gets harder to treat. So for instance, we have technology now to detect cardiac plaque, or the plaque in your arteries of your heart, really early, like long before you'll ever have a symptom, maybe 20 to 30 years before you'll have a symptom, and show you a different way to reverse it. But yet, our system doesn't pay the doctors, nor do we have interventions that reward the physicians for detecting disease until you show up with chest pain. And by the time you get chest pain, you've got at least a 70% blockage of the main artery of your heart. The idea here is, just like the airline industry, we want to catch these problems early, but our entire system in healthcare is based on symptoms. And so I tell people all the time, we're really good at chasing disease. And that's what we do, okay? And that's what we're paid for. Unfortunately, the way the system is set up today, everybody makes more money the sicker you are. So we need a paradigm shift, not only on looking at, hey, you know what, I feel healthy, I need to go get checked out, just like we would check out a jet aircraft before you jump on and fly it across the Atlantic. But the same mentality needs to go toward moving the payment model away from rewarding sick care behavior and rewarding sick care treatments to paying your doctor to keep you healthy, and maybe taking away some money if you get sick. These are the common things that we're doing. It's just the risk-adjusted model is not set up that way. The third component of this, though, is really the medical education system. And unfortunately, in a world of exponential technologies, where technologies are doubling and tripling, and now with AI is increasing 100x by some estimates, in the span of a year, we have a healthcare system that takes at least 17 years to adopt a new technology and bring it into widespread medical practice. So we have these juxtapositions of these three forces, and we at Fountain Life and a few other clinics around the country and around the world are trying to move the paradigm. However, it's not an easy thing, because we got big pharma doesn't like this, or it doesn't really work for them, although we can talk about some opportunities for big pharma. In addition to that, the big health systems, I was in the hospital business. So, my background, I did hospitals for a long time. We get paid for heads and meds. That's what we get paid for. I don't get paid to keep you healthy, keep you out of the hospital. And if you stay out of the hospital, my business model suffers. So the point is, we need a paradigm shift, and we need to find a way to transition from this kind of sick care world that we live in that's really bankrupting the U.S. at this point, to a proactive system that keeps people healthier longer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So from my understanding, the majority of people that have heart attacks don't exhibit any symptoms prior. Like the most common symptoms, like sudden death, right? Same thing with cancer. But in the longevity space, I guess there's a lot of noise now, as I'm sure you're familiar, right? A lot of times people think longevity, they're talking about peptides, and they're talking about red light therapy and saunas and, Brian Johnson, all this stuff. And you mention longevity to someone and they say, well, I don't want to live forever. But a lot of what Fountain Life does is, I think a lot of it is more just in terms of extending both like health span or lifespan. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so we believe, and the data right now shows that with the technology we have today, and we don't need a breakthrough in gene therapy for this, we could probably get you to 95 healthy. We know that today. It's not that we don't have application of it, we don't have the knowledge to do it. We just don't have it widely disseminated, and it's not widely practiced. One of the challenges is there is a lot of noise in the longevity space, and the problem is these one-off players. And look, I'm not negative on Brian Johnson because he's a one-man exercise in testing everything, but everybody's genetics are going to be different than Brian Johnson's. Everybody's situation is going to be different, so you can't use somebody else's algorithm necessarily to apply to you. That being said, what we want to do is move away from the, I call the influencer age of longevity to data-driven longevity. And that's what Fountain is really heavily predicated on. Number one, not only are we using the most advanced technology to detect disease at its very earliest inception, but at the same time, we're collecting data year over year with our members to show their health outcomes improving, because we know that the first step to longevity is, number one, don't die of something stupid, meaning don't die of a disease that you should know about that doesn't prematurely end your life. And like when you spoke about cardiac disease, we do know that 70% of people who have a heart attack will not have a symptom prior to having a heart attack. And we know that more than half of the people, or about half, that have their first heart attack really don't survive. We also know that 70% of people that die from cancer today die from a cancer that you're not going to get routinely screened for. So, we don't routinely screen you for kidney cancer. We don't routinely screen you for pancreatic, ovarian, all of the things that you may think of, certainly kidney, other solid organ tumors. We don't routinely screen for those. And so we use advanced technology that it will pick those up. There's nothing wrong with mammography. There's nothing wrong with colonoscopy. There's nothing wrong with a prostate exam, although I'd rather get an MRI than a prostate exam personally. But I would just tell you that the reality is we don't use the latest technology to detect these things. And so, the number one killer today is still heart disease. And I remind people all the time, we haven't really made a lot of inroads in there. We've decreased the number of fatal heart attacks, but we really haven't stopped the number of people either having chest pain or dying of heart attacks. We haven't made a big inroad there. So the goal here is to accelerate the technology and then be able to ultimately disseminate that, and also disseminate the AI algorithms that can help us detect these things early.
And could you speak to the experience of Fountain Life in terms of like the data upload, like really just what's involved in that executive health screen? Because there's a lot, right? The MRI, CT scan, mapping the genome, et cetera.
I tell people all the time, the most complex thing we've ever undertaken to understand is actually the human body. And I think when you realize that the human body has on average 40 trillion cells, and every cell does, we think, between 1 and 10 billion chemical reactions per second per cell, and the average cell has about 1 trillion molecules. So when you start to look at that, it's kind of like thinking about the galaxy or, the universe. It's a lot of information. So how do you start to get your head wrapped around what that is? And so up until now, we've used 200-year-old physical exam, 200-year-old stethoscope, 10 or 15 blood biomarkers, not really an in-depth evaluation of what's going on inside your body. So what we did is we set out to find the most comprehensive set of tests that we could do to create what is the most complete digital twin of you available today, which means full body and brain MRI using AI, and we do about 10,000 slices from head to toe so that we can pretty much image everything. We use the most advanced cardiac CCTA, which is an advanced cardiac scan of your heart, looking for the plaque that's inside your arteries. We use artificial intelligence to read that. We use your whole genome sequence. So, everybody has different genes unless you're a twin and you share it with someone else. And the reality is you have 3.2 billion base pairs, and they can be sequenced now to look at all kinds of things in terms of your health. We certainly sequence the whole genome, but certainly focusing on the 25,000 active genes that you have in your body. In addition to that, we're going to look at all the bacteria in your gut, because you have about 10 times as many bacteria in your gut as you do with cells in your body. So we're going to look at all of those because those have a huge impact on your health. We're also going to look at over 160 blood biomarkers, ones you will never get in your doctor's office routinely unless you wind up with a specialty case. And the point is, we're trying to create this very, very elaborate digital twin that also includes cognitive testing. We're going to look at strength training. We're going to look at toxin testing. We're going to look at, what you've been exposed to. We're going to look at flexibility. We're going to look at your VO2 to see how well your oxygen capacity is. There's a litany of things we're doing all to establish a baseline. Number one, to detect early disease. Number two, to establish your digital twin. So once your digital twin is established, the AI analyzes all 240 gigabytes of data to create a really comprehensive overview of what's going on inside your body. From that, our care team then, led by your longevity physician, can implement what we call an optimization plan. And in that optimization plan is where we're going to use the things you spoke about, the hormones, the peptides, the things you need. Now, there's some really basics in healthcare and longevity that everybody should know and that are free, right? I mean, it's sleep, it's exercise, it's diet. We understand that. But our approach is, number one, use your digital twin with deep information about you specifically as an individual to customize an approach that's going to work for you rather than doing a series of trial and error. And then once we have you optimized, give you access to technology possibly that you've never heard of that can maybe extend your health span even further.
Yeah. So when someone hears this, and I guess the other question is how often would somebody do this? Is it be like an annual thing, once a year, and you kind of see how things change over time?
Yeah, so we have a program. The most common program we have is one where we do all this testing up front, and then we follow you throughout the year with a combination of different tests, blood biomarkers. We're going to you have an entire care team. By the way, we're watching all your wearables, all your activity, all your sleep. All of that is ingested by our AI named Zori, and Zori can see all of this, and then you can ask questions. Really demystifies your healthcare for you because Zori can speak to you on a high school level if necessary. But more importantly, it gives you access and agency over your data for the first time. Over the course of a year, we'll continue to touch base, and depending on what we find, we may repeat a test. We may, add some tests in, depending on what you and your care team decide was optimal for you. And generally speaking, it's about once a year that you need to go through, I call the deep dive. Because a deep dive is when we can actually pick these things up at super early stages, whether it be a stage 1 cancer or, obviously heart disease. If you have heart disease, we can see how much you have, and then we can show you a way to possibly reverse that, which we've done in significant numbers of our members.
For someone who's hearing this, and I imagine there's quite a few because I've run into them, that they hear about all these tests, and part of it's, I guess, almost like Schrodinger's cat, where they're like, I kind of don't want to know, like, I don't want to find something, right? Like you hear that, you hear that a lot. What's your response to that?
Well, we always tell people you will find out eventually.
Yeah.
Okay. So chances are you will find out eventually. You'll either find out that you have cardiac disease now, or you'll find out if you're lucky enough to make it to the emergency room. Okay. But that's when they'll tell you when you're gripping your chest at age 60 or 70, or maybe younger now. We're seeing this. I tell people all the time, I think of it. So I was an Air Force flight surgeon and I still am a private pilot. I tell people all the time, I said, how would you feel if your pilot said, I looked around the outside of the airplane, it looks okay. I think we should go. No, you'd be like saying, no, wait, did you do the engine run-ups? Did you check? Did you do all the preventive maintenance? Did you x-ray the wings? Did you check the fuel supplies? What's the safety record of the aircraft? That's what you're paying for. Except when it comes to healthcare, because we've trained you very well in medicine, I tell people this all the time, we've trained you not to go to the doctor unless what? You're really sick. People tell you that all the time. Well, that works really well if you have a cold or maybe the flu. It does not work well with a cardiac disease, and it doesn't work well for cancer, and it doesn't work well for these other things. When your highest probability of great outcomes happens when we detect it really early. And so everybody knows if you detect a cancer early, you've got a great opportunity. What people don't know is if we catch your heart disease early and we can reverse your heart disease and get your plaque down to zero, you're not going to probably succumb to heart disease. And you can take that one off your list. And by the way, in the middle of the night when you wake up with chest pain and you've had this advanced scanning, you're not thinking about a heart attack. You're thinking about that burrito you had at lunch because maybe that gave you some spasm in your upper esophagus. So these are the things that I think give people peace of mind. And I would just tell you, once you know the information, it's just like knowing the status of your aircraft. You just don't worry about those little funny noises anymore when you're flying the aircraft because it's all been through a pretty complete test. I think when you have your health in your hands and you have the access to your data and you understand it for the first time, what's going on inside your body, it gives people peace of mind. So that anxiety you may have about coming in the first time quickly goes away. And, and what we find with our members now is most of them say they feel a little naked if they don't get this done at least once a year. They want to know, right? And so, I would say our average member is about 52 years old. And, that's not young, but it's certainly not old by today's standards. However, some of those people want to hike Mount Kilimanjaro. Some of those people want to dive the Great Barrier Reef. Some of those people want to do extreme sports and, up into their 70s. And their doctors always historically would say, well, I don't think you should do that. You're getting old, you should probably slow down. Well, if your coronary arteries and your flexibility, your cognitive test and everything else are better than that of a 40-year-old, why can't you do that? What is the problem is we're treating you along population health metrics. We're treating you like every 70-year-old we see coming through the office, and we're making assumptions, but we really are making those assumptions in the absence of data about you specifically.
How much does one's genetics play a role versus lifestyle? Like, there's going to be people that listen to this and say, well, I'm predisposed to X, Y, and Z, and how much can they actually influence?
Yeah, so this is a big area of, matter of fact, just made the news recently. There's a new study that just came out, and they were talking about longevity, and like how much is genetics involved. There's a debate. Some people say as little as 7% is genetic for aging. Some people say 55%. It really doesn't matter, because ultimately what the most important thing is to know what is it that I can do about my health right now and what's in my control. So it doesn't matter if you have the bad genes for heart disease, quite frankly, because we can test for that. And we have medications and treatments to basically ameliorate that so it doesn't become a risk factor for you. If your body produces too much cholesterol or doesn't absorb enough cholesterol, we can find out. There's tests for all of that. And then there are ways to treat that and then track it over time. Same thing with neurodegenerative disease. A lot of people say, well, I've got bad genes for Alzheimer's. Both my parents died of Alzheimer's. Well, first of all, most people assume just because somebody dies of dementia, it's always Alzheimer's. Now, that's the most common type. But quite frankly, there's not that many people that have two bad genes for Alzheimer's. And even if they do, you can mitigate most, if not all, of the risk with lifestyle. And so once again, you need a tool. Number one, measures the part of your brain that's involved with Alzheimer's. Number two, knowing what your genetic status is. Look, genes are not destiny. I remind people all the time that genes load the gun, but it's environment that pulls the trigger. So what you need to know is what hand have you been dealt? Okay. And chances are, if you're listening to this podcast right now, you probably don't have a monogenic variant that's going to prematurely end your life, because it would have probably already been ended by now. That doesn't mean that you don't have risk factors for metabolic disease, heart disease, neurodegenerative disease, and all of that. But the science has moved so sufficiently to this point that if we can catch these things early, we certainly can change the trajectory of the disease. And I think that's the most important thing that people need to remember. Once again, if you go to your family doctor, your standard family doctor, they're going to be anywhere between 17 and 20 years behind the technology. Now, they hate it when I say that because they believe that they're right on the cutting edge. But the reality is it's a physical impossibility for your family doctor to be up on the latest of everything, because we publish worldwide today about 4,000 medical articles every single day around the world. So it's a virtual impossibility to keep up with exactly where the innovations are happening. And certainly we've never really spent a lot of time or resources on preventive medicine in the United States, particularly. Of our $5 trillion that we spend on healthcare in the United States, and I tell people this because people are amazed at how much money we actually spend. It's $5 trillion. That's 1/2 of the entire world's healthcare spend for 4% of the world's population. And we rank number 64 in longevity. So that's not a good ROI by anybody's business metric. But I think what's important to think about there is because we spend $5 trillion, only 3% of those dollars are spent using preventive measures. So I suspect, once again, you wouldn't get on an airplane if Delta Airlines decided we were only going to spend 3% of our revenue keeping airplanes safe to fly. And yet the healthcare system has no problem relegating you to that, because the system, number one, your doctor isn't trained on the latest technology. He's not paid to keep you healthy, generally speaking, unless you have an integrative medicine doctor or a functional medicine doctor or a concierge doctor, which most people don't. And then third thing is the payment system is totally misaligned. And so I think when you realize that everybody kind of benefits, the sicker you move along the progression and nobody's being paid to really keep you healthy, then I always tell people it's time for you to be CEO of your own health. It's time for you to start asking the questions. It's time for you starting getting agency over your health so you have some control. Because ultimately, it's you as an individual that is on the hook for your health. It's not your doctor, and it's certainly not your friend. It's you. You're the one who's on the hook. And so when it comes to your family, and particularly your spouse or your children, I tell people a lot of times, people go, I don't know if I want to do that. And I go, well, don't do it for yourself. Do it for the people who depend on you. And if you're running a business, a lot of those people may depend on you, and you don't realize it. And we all know somebody who dropped out of a heart attack. We all know somebody who went to the doctor, he got a clean bill of health 3 months ago, and now he just got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Well, guess what? That stage 4 cancer didn't happen like in the last 3 months. That's been percolating along for a really long time, okay? In most instances. Same thing with heart disease. You don't just up and die of a heart attack like without any serious cardiac disease. It's there, it's building over time, and you just don't realize it. So, by the way, we are firm believers this is the only way we're going to change healthcare and to get better outcomes. And I think if we don't do it this way, adopting new technology, now we believe that there'll be other technology that will come down that may be even better than what we're currently doing, but we're constantly scouring the world for that. And I always tell people again, we live in the wealthiest country in the world with some of the worst outcomes. So at some point, what are you paying for? And secondly, if you have discretionary dollars and you can afford to go through testing, you should. Because if nothing else, get a baseline so that you can start to change the trajectory of your health.
Now, in full disclosure, like my wife and I, we're Fountain Life members. We love it. And everything you're describing, I mean, without a doubt, this is the future of medicine. But I guess the challenge is that to get, involved with concierge medicine, and even at the level of Fountain Life, that's at present state probably inaccessible for many people. How do you see that changing? What's it going to take to change that? I mean, are there any options for people that may not be able to afford like the level of care that Fountain Life provides, but just to, start moving down this path?
Well, so we're seeing this happen now. I mean, outside of what Fountain Life does, there are others out there now doing whole body MRIs. There are people out there you can go get your genome sequenced. What we're working on at Fountain Life is what we think is going to be the #1 longevity platform in the world that will have multiple entry points. Now, right now, we're a clinic-based model, but we're in the process of developing, through our AI and our digital data platform, a platform that could literally plug into almost any setting. So when I say that, for instance, we have conversations going on with major health systems now and even moderate-sized health systems that are interested in starting their own longevity program because they know the public is asking for it and they really don't know how to do it. So, with a patient-facing app, with hospitals owning MRIs and CT scans and all of this, they just don't know how to use those tools in the field of longevity for early disease detection and the protocols to be able to start to do disease reversal. So that's one area that we're working on very carefully. The other thing we're working on right now is a lower entry level, just using kind of blood biomarkers, but using AI. So the AI we've been training for the last 3 years is getting better and better. It continues to be reinforcement trained, which is super important to have a human in the loop on this because the AIs can otherwise kind of get a little off the beaten track sometimes. So you want to make sure you're using a human in the loop with good judgment. But what we're doing is we're using our large data sets of really deep data to be able to find patterns in the data that then are applicable to small data sets. It's called transfer learning, and it's one thing you can do with AI, which really is pretty remarkable. And I think as we move through this, what will happen is over time, even employers will start to gravitate toward this. And we're seeing this with executive health, but we want to see a bigger adoption curve. The cost of getting a full body MRI right now is pretty expensive. However, with scale, all technology drops. The question is, are you going to spend the money on the front end, like we do in the airline industry, or are you going to spend it on the back end chasing disease? And I think when you start talking and you realize who's actually paying the bills in healthcare today, it's actually self-insured employers. It's not the government. The government certainly pays for Medicare, Medicaid, all of those. But about 70% of employees today in the United States are covered by a company that is self-insured. The problem is that company, even though it's full risk, doesn't really have a great roadmap on how to lower the cost of taking care of their patients. So what happens is you wind up getting a broker. Broker comes to you and says, yep, your rates are going up again. Your pharmacy benefit went up. Now we got to spend money, your PBM. Oh, hey, we're going to get a rebate on the PBM. We're going to get you a lower cost network. All they're doing is really getting you lower cost access points to the sick care system. That's it. And you then take the risk and hope and pray that you don't wind up with a major illness on your payroll that hits your stop loss and causes all your rates to go up. The reality is the employer has a lot of control over what they want to spend money on. And if they decided they wanted to start screening people at scale, and by the way, my recommendation is don't listen to Blue Cross Blue Shield or United or the Bucas. They really don't understand this field at all. And while they may have a few physicians inside there, the insurance business is not always the first to the table in terms of traditional indemnity insurance. I would tell you, though, we're sitting some really interesting conversations with some of these new companies out there that are working with self-insured plans. And there are some pretty innovative ones. And the idea, can we start to screen people at scale using, components of this technology that can then start to pick up the big, expensive things. And then the idea then is if you can keep your employees for a period of time, improve their overall health. So you cut down on absenteeism, presenteeism, and all of that. So what I would tell you is that there's a lot of movement in this area. Even Medicare now is getting ready to go to a full risk model for a lot of people. And so I think physicians are going to have to realize that they're going to need a better set of tools to assess risk, whether it be our tool set or something, or derivation of our tool set or something else. I don't know. But this movement toward early disease detection and optimization is going to continue out of economic necessity.
Gotcha. And I want to go back. I know earlier we talked about just the early detection of disease. For a lot of people who listen to this podcast, they're CEOs. You mentioned being the CEO of your health. What happens when we move from detection to optimization? Because I think this is where it starts to get even more interesting. It's not just, hey, let's catch disease early, but how do we become more energetic? How do we catch, maybe there's certain like food allergies. It starts to really adjust our lifestyle to be more effective and more productive.
No, absolutely. It's a great question. So once again, we do all the testing, and I know everybody gets focused on testing because they're worried, make sure, I don't have cancer. I don't have heart disease. Okay, so what do I do next? And the point is, what we want to do is optimize your cellular health. Lots of ways to do that. Number one, we want to make sure you're at the optimal range for your hormones, males and females. And by the way, that's going to go on probably for the rest of your life. And the new data is out right now. It's incontrovertible. Both men and women without a contraindication should probably be on hormone therapy for the rest of their life once their hormones decline, because your body's not going to put it back by itself. And ideally, they make a huge impact on your health. Secondarily, there are things like peptides, which are things that can help improve your cellular health as well. And a lot of these you lose over time. And there are ways to boost those and boost your metabolic machinery. We're going to look at things like your mitochondrial health, which are the power plants of the cell. There's ways to improve your mitochondrial health. We're going to look heavily at your gut and what you're eating. Do you have food sensitivities? Are you eating a lot of heavy fish? Are you getting toxins? Are you getting arsenic, mercury? All those things we're going to look at because we want you to have the cleanest environment and the most healthy environment of things you put into your body because we know it affects cellular health. And as we move through these evolutions, we're also going to look at sleep. Sleep's super important. And most people don't measure their sleep. Most people say, I think I had a good night's sleep last night. But did you? Did you really get an hour or more of deep sleep? How do you know? Well, if you don't measure, you can't manage. So we're really big into measurements because we think it's important. I also want to emphasize we don't over measure. We don't want you to be so obsessed about getting up every morning and checking all your vitals that you miss the point of living life. Because ultimately, and I talk about this a lot, it doesn't matter all the things we do. We got a great technology. But if you want to know what the number one thing is to extend your healthy lifespan, it's sense of community and sense of purpose. So what we are really going to work with you with our coaching teams is, what does that look like for you? What are your goals? What are your ambitions? How can we help keep you at optimal energy state so you feel like you can go tackle the world? Maybe it's not tackling the world. Maybe you just want to start a not-for-profit. Maybe you want to volunteer at your local school. Maybe you're, 55 years old and retired and you're looking for the next evolution, but your health is failing. Those are the things we kind of work with you on. But what we find with our members is as they get more and more health optimized, then they want to know what's next and what's next. And so that's what our job is to bring you what is next. And that's a litany of things we're seeing out on the market right now, everything from some small molecules that are in early stage testing to therapeutic plasma exchange to stem cells. There's a lot that's out there today, and we can certainly help guide you along that continuum.
Yeah, actually, on that note, I'm curious as to what your approach is on certain emerging technologies and kind of balancing scientific rigor with just speed to the market, right? And just that entrepreneurial speed of wanting to be able to enable people to take advantage of some of the latest, technology, but at the same time, it's relatively new. What's your approach to
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, number one, we have a group of very committed physicians and scientists that evaluate all the new technology that's coming. And we see almost all of it that's out there that we think is really, going to stand up to scrutiny. If it's super early stage and we want to potentially entertain it, number one, does it have scientific rigor? Number one, did they do some studies? Have they proven it beyond a shadow of a doubt? Is it safe? That's number one, right? And then after that, has it been through enough safety trials that we can potentially introduce it to our members? We do participate in FDA-approved trials in the company. And one of the reasons is because we want to accelerate the science. So if it's proven efficacious and it's proven safe, we can then sometimes make it available to our members on a voluntary basis. And it allows the company who's developing the technology to accelerate the development of that technology. And at the same time, it gives our members access to something that could really be life-changing. Not all of our members do this. A lot of them want to wait until the final, verdict is through the FDA. But I will tell you that we have a large number of members that kind of want to know what's next. And so good case of example of this is like stem cell technology. And so we do placental stem cells in Florida now because we're allowed to under Florida law. And the FDA has kind of given Florida a waiver on this, if you will. They're certainly not going to enforce until they see what the results are. Up until now, most people left the United States to get stem cells. You can get stem cells from your own body, which is fine, but old stem cells may not be as efficacious as day zero stem cells from a placenta. So what we've done is we've partnered with one of our partners, Dr. Hariri, who has 35 years of experience with stem cells and has had more studies done in his stem cell population than anybody. So they're highly safe, highly effective. And we're testing those now in small groups of people who want to participate in those studies. So the point here is maintaining scientific rigor, number one, on what you're going to offer people. But number two, help us move the science forward. So what is your baseline? We probably have the most well-quantified people on the planet in terms of the digital twin because we've got all these scans and genomics and everything else. And then we can look over time, year over year, when we do an intervention, what changes we saw, not only in the area we may be targeting. Let's say, for instance, if you have muscle wasting because you're getting older, that's an area we could target. But maybe we find that gerotherapeutic intervention, like stem cells, actually has an effect on your brain, or it might have an effect on your heart, because we're looking at all of it. And that's very different than a traditional FDA study that just looks at one thing. And then we assume that there's not, because you're asymptomatic, we assume there's nothing else going on in the body, right? I mean, that's kind of the fallacy, and I think in some of the older studies. But I think this will be the way that we will start testing things at scale as we move forward, because it gives us that much more information.
And once somebody's got a lot of the fundamentals dialed in, like sleep and exercise and their diet, and obviously they've done a lot of the testing, are there interventions that you're bullish about? I mean, in addition to stem cells, are there things that you see coming down the pipeline that you think these probably have a high return on investment?
Yeah, so right now, I think that if you look in the landscape, one of the ones that we're seeing really high yield on is GLP-1s. These are like semaglutide. So most people think about it as for diabetes and obesity. But the reality is we're showing amazing results at really improving mitochondrial health. We believe it will probably be the first drug category for longevity. And that's just not my opinion. The CEO of Eli Lilly believes the same thing. He's on record as saying, we believe the class of GLP-1s will be the first longevity drug, because it's the first thing that's really moving multiple diseases at the same time. Not only reducing cardiac disease, reducing risk for neurodegenerative disease. There's a litany of things it can do. So we think that that's certainly one. And that's one that people can kind of get their head wrapped around. Stem cells is another one. It's early. We see some really promise in stem cells right now. I would say it's a little bit early, but we've got great results. But the things we're looking at that we're seeing that are in the lab right now, everything from small molecules to the real area that is probably gaining most traction is epigenetic reprogramming. And that is starting to look at small molecules and even, what we call adeno-associated viruses. These are viral vectors to do gene therapy to change your genetic expression around how your cells operate. And so some of this is centered around some of Dr. David Sinclair's work around the theory of aging, meaning that, you don't age because your DNA breaks. You age because the ability of your body to read the DNA into a youthful state drops off with inflammation and damage over time. And he believes you can reset that. He's actually proven that in an animal model, and they're getting ready to start human trials for the very first time. So these are early stage technologies that are coming. If you look at across the landscape, one of our co-founders, Dr. Peter Diamandis, he has the $101 million X Prize, which is the first prize for the first team that can prove that they have reduced physiologic age by at least 10 years in 4 major organ systems. Those tests, those labs right now, they're down to 60 finalists or 100 semifinalists, I think. And that award will be given in 2030. So it's just around the corner. And they believe that there are several of those labs that will probably qualify for at least a portion of this. So what I would tell people is, with the advent of AI, with the advent of automated testing that we're doing now, we have dark labs that run these tests night and day. with 100x the output of what humans could used to be able to do, plus AI hypothesis generation. The goal here is you should live another 10 to 15 healthy years using what we know now to intercept the technology that's coming that can probably give you another 20. And nobody wants to live to 120 and look like they're 120, right? Or be frail like 120. But if you could be high performance at age 120 like you are when you're 60, most people will take that. And they would love that, right? And so the idea is how many more productive years can you get? And this is just preventive maintenance until you get there, until the technology comes. And it will come. It will come much faster than most people anticipate. And then there's a lot of hype around the longevity movement. There are guys that are making claims that are probably not accurate. There are guys that make a lot of claims without data. But I can just tell you where the science is, the amount of money being spent, and also it becomes economic necessity. So I think when you realize how quickly the population in the United States and worldwide is aging and longevity medicine particularly will actually become the new form of primary care because our population will demand it. You know, the idea of warehousing our elderly and putting them up in skilled nursing and memory care is just not going to work. First of all, we don't have the resources to do that. Most people don't have a spare $100,000 jiggling around in their pocket a year to be put into a skilled nursing facility and manage your decline. So the point is, I think governments around the world have woken up. They know that they're going to have to be more aggressive about taking care of people as they get older and optimizing their health. And this is just part of the tool set to do that.
I know you mentioned almost this idea of like longevity escape velocity. Just knowing what you know, I'm curious as to what your prediction on this is that how far away are we from this idea of being able to potentially live forever, at least choose when we die? And then there's also discussion of actually not just stopping aging, but reversing aging. And is this possible in our lifetime?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, look, I mean, far be it from me to countermand the predictions of Ray Kurzweil, who's been 90% successful in his career of predicting. And he would tell you that longevity escape velocity is sometime around 2039. And that's what he believes. And what does that mean? That means for every 1 year you live at least 1 year plus more. And so that's what point at which, this will happen. Now, if you were alive 150 years ago and I were to tell you people were going to live routinely to 95 and 95 years old, you would have thought that was crazy because your world, everybody was dying at 40. So you couldn't possibly imagine somebody living to 95. Certainly not the bulk of the population, right? So what we have done is we have made inroads into longevity escape velocity. And right now, for every year you live, you get about extra 4 months. So quickly you can see the technology stacking. Now, will we get there by 2039? I don't know. I think it's almost impossible to even predict now, knowing how fast the AIs are moving and how fast science is moving today. On the other hand, can we reverse aging? And that's the big question. The data in the animal models suggest yes. Maybe you can reverse aging by up to 20 years. But once again, not all animal models translate to humans, and we'll just have to see what the lab results show. There are going to be, my suspicion is it's not going to be one solution because of the immense complexity of the human body. I don't think it'll come down to one switch. I think we're going to find out there's going to be a cocktail of things you need and different interventions in order to get you there. But I am very bullish on this idea that you should be able to make 95 healthy today with what we know. And for most people, that's kind of outside the normal bounds of what they're used to. So, right now, with a little effort and a little application and a little judicious use of technology we have today, let's get you to 95 healthy. And then guess what? 25 years from now, we'll see where we are, right? But if I had told you 30 years ago that we'd be where we are today on gene sequencing and gene editing and all this, you would have said, no, that's 100 years away at least, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and when I hear people say, I don't want to live to 100 plus years old or whatever, I think that's under the assumption that their energy wanes, right? They're unable to do, like they in their mind picture what 100 looks like, and they think, I don't want that, right? As opposed to if they're able to still functionally do the things that they enjoy, and they're surrounded by people that they love, and they got children and grandchildren and so on, they'd probably want to stick around for those people, right?
Yeah, and it's high performance aging. All you have to do is go to the grocery store and you can see somebody who's not participating in high performance aging, right? As they basically hang on to their grocery cart, barely getting around there. I mean, there are a lot of people 80 years old doing that. However, let's look to the flip side. Sylvester Stallone is almost 80 years old if he's not 80 right now. He's close. He's still lifting 350 pounds in the gym. He's acting, producing, directing. He has unbelievable posture, cognitively sharp, very productive at his age 80, and he's the epitome of optimization. The point is, you use the tool set. Don't be afraid of the tool set. And this idea that you should have to submit to low performance aging by the medical system, I think is a misnomer. I mean, we did this. Unfortunately, we did an unbelievable disservice to women over the last 25 years when we told them they can't take bioidentical hormones, and that was the standard. And now the FDA has come out and said, I'm sorry, this is a big mistake. The last 25 years, we shouldn't have done that. Well, what do you do with the women that you told 25 years ago, right? So once again, the data's out there. It's not going to come through your traditional doctor's office because they're 20 years behind. I know they will not believe they're 20 years behind, but they are 20 years behind where the technology is. And so I think it's important that you take control and you start asking the hard questions. At the end of the day, it's you're the one on the hook for your health, nobody else.
For those listening, like if you could, give them the top 3 things that they take away nothing else from this podcast for an entrepreneur, what would be like the top 3 things they should focus on if their goal is longevity?
Yeah. So number one, do some form of testing to make sure you know what your baseline is. That's super important. Number 2, sleep is super important. I talked about it earlier. You have to get good quality sleep. It's the time that your brain cleans itself. It's the time that your body recovers. So you need to optimize your heat and sleep, and you can measure that. There's lots of really great ways to do that. There is a book out, probably one of the best books out there, Dr. Matt Walker, called Why We Sleep. It's a great book. It's very easy to read. It's quick. Just gives you some ideas on sleep hygiene. If you remember nothing else from this, I would tell you, get to the gym and lift heavy, because the people with the highest muscle mass live the longest and have the most disease-free. Period. End of story. Full stop. You can go run on the treadmill all you want. That's fine. If you don't have muscle mass, it's not going to make any difference. You want high performance aging, you need muscle mass. You make sure your bone density doesn't deteriorate. You need to lift weights. And you need to lift heavy. 5 pounds dumbbells aren't going to cut it. If you're not a little sore 2 days after you leave the gym, you haven't lifted heavy enough. Because when you lift, it's not just about muscle mass. It's you create things called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which actually stimulates your brain to a healthier state. It creates more connections between the cells in your brain. And people who routinely are weight training have less cognitive decline than anybody out there. And even people with early cognitive decline that weight train can reverse it. So once again, you have a lot of tools in your arsenal. Once again, not being taught by the traditional medical system because they don't even have classes in most medical schools in nutrition, much less exercise physiology. So you just need to, focus on those. So I would just tell you, those are the biohacks that I'm really the most focused on: sleep, and then obviously, baseline sleep, and then looking at muscle mass for sure.
Got it. And Dr. Kapp, as we come to a close, this being the Game Changing Attorney podcast, what does being a game changer mean to you?
Not settling for the status quo. That's what I believe, because I think the status quo is not always the healthiest place to be. So I also think, it's a sense of mission, right? Find something you're passionate about. I didn't understand what passion was for the longest time growing up. People say, oh, find your passion. I had no idea what they meant. And actually, somebody explained it to me one time. They said, when you're a child and you're trying to figure out what your passion is, or you're trying to find out what your kid's passion is, it's what they would do on their spare time with nobody else watching other than doom scrolling. They can't doom scroll. But the idea is, what do they read? What are they interested in? What is it that really gets them excited? And that's really kind of what they should passion. But also, when you find the mission in the area that you can make an impact on, go find people of like mind and go just get started getting started. Tony is one of our advisors, and he's on our board, one of our co-founders. And Tony Robbins, he's the king of take action, take massive action. Don't wait. Even if you don't have it all perfectly figured out, get moving, right? Because motion begets a lot of positives. And even though it may not always be accurate, at least you're moving down the track. So I tell people find a passion, find a mission, and find like-minded people to help you move it along.
I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Kapp for taking the time to join us on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that I can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of my book absolutely free at GameChangingAttorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot me a text at 404-531-7691 and I'll answer any question that you've got for me. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it'll help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on our interview with Dr. Bill Kapp, see the show notes for this episode in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.